Hi, Dolan. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, yeah. Nice to meet you.
You too. Thank you for taking the time out to come on.
No
Um,
problem.
with my musical guests, I go back to the start really. When did you first take an interest in music?
Um, when I was quite very young, like, 6 or 7, and I lived in the middle. I was brought up in the middle of nowhere in Northumberland, right, in a tiny, tiny village, and there was a piano. I think when we parents had moved to this house, and there was a piano left there, an old cranky piano, and I started to try and pick tunes out on it, and I was really lucky because there was a woman who taught the piano who lived like about 2 miles, 3 miles out of the village. And I got lessons. I used to cycle to her house. She was called Mrs. Perry, and I was terrified of her. And she used to check my hands if I'd washed them before I played every time, and then slap me on the hands if I hadn't, on the back of my hands if I hadn't, and make me wash them. But she really got me into the idea of playing an instrument, and she was a strict sort of disciplinarian. So I suppose I picked something up from that as well. And then when I was it was a very, musical household. My parents were sort of, of the 60s, and they'd taken me to see the Stones in Hyde Park when I was 3, and Pink Floyd when I was a baby, and all sorts of stuff like that. So, um, I grew up listening to the Beatles and Stones, a lot in our house. And my mum was really into Joni Mitchell as well. So all of that was sort of around me as I was getting older. And then obviously when you hit sort of your 12, 13, that's when it really kicks in, doesn't it? Your musical taste.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, yeah. So, do you think you were always destined to go down a musical route then?
Well, I mean, I think I was, and yeah, because I put down this careers thing at school, and it said, what do you want to be? And I put rock star. And the careers teacher, I'm having this very awkward conversation with a careers teacher. So I must have been pretty determined. And I just knew that I wanted to do something with music. And I wasn't like trying to be, the biggest superstar in the world or anything like that. I just really wanted to get involved in music and making music and being with musicians, and the whole thing of going to recording studios. I had a book when I was about 12 about making records, production. I was sort of fascinated by the whole culture around it. So I was desperate to get involved. And I, literally had no idea. There was no internet course. Probably most of your guests to come on here and go, Joe, I remember when there was no internet. But it was really difficult to find out, and you had these really embarrassing conversations where you approach people in the pub and go, I hear you've got a bass guitar, I hear you play drums and stuff. So yeah, I was determined. And then when I'd saved up all this money and to buy an electric guitar when I was 13 or 14, and my dad had it started a business, and he was like working hell for leather in this business all the time. And he's one of those people who always knows someone. Like, oh, I know someone who does that. So I said, I want to get electric guitar. I've got to go to this guitar shop. And he said, oh, no, no, no. Look, I know someone. And he got this guy to bring a guitar and an amp package to the office on a Saturday. He was working. And I wanted, actually, what I wanted was a bass, because my mate was called Sham, and he was into Sham 69, and he said he could be in the band if I had a bass guitar. So I asked for a bass, and then got there, and it was electric. It was a 6 string, electric guitar. And I was like, look, man, that's a guitar, not a bass. My dad said, well, who plays bass in the Rolling Stones? I said, Bill Wyman. He says, he's a fucking wanker. You don't want to be him. And that was it, really. So I got guitar.
How did you learn to play the guitar? Would you play along to records?
Yeah, yeah, I did. Listen to records and try and imitate it very badly. I'm still really bad at playing other people's music, but I really got into. I had this Muddy Waters record, like Muddy Waters live with Johnny Winters playing guitar on it, and I was like obsessed by that and the blues. And then I got Jimi Hendrix live at the Albert Hall, I think it was, and or it was a live album of his, and I was obsessed by that as well. Obviously, I couldn't do anything like that whatsoever. But I was just sort of muddling along, really, and because where I lived was so out of the way, I broke guitar string. It might be like 2 months before I got another guitar string. So be playing with four strings or three strings and trying to do all sorts of mad things to try and make strings and keep it all going. But yeah, I just sort of persevered and I sort of stopped for a while, and then it was really when I got to uni that I sort of got into when I came to Manchester, which and I came to Manchester because of Johnny Marr's got a lot to answer for. That is literally why I came to Manchester because of Johnny Marr to
Really?
get the university. You got full grant in those days and find people and make a band. And by that time, I was really that's what I was going to do. I knew that that's what I was going to do.
So was it the music as much as university then that brought you to Manchester then? Like you say, Johnny Marr and the Smiths and stuff.
Yeah, I mean at the time it was all pre that Manchester stuff. So, but I'd gone to Liverpool. I mean, this is how like naive you are. Right, well, the Beatles are from Liverpool, and Echo and the Bunnymen are from Liverpool. The teardrop explodes. I'll go to Liverpool. So I was there for about like one term at uni, and this is not going to go down well in Liverpool or Newcastle. But one of the things I was trying to get away from in Newcastle was that people aren't very, they weren't at the time, maybe it's all changed now, but at the time people were quite defeatist and not very get up and go. They'd complain about things not happening and not being a scene and stuff. And I assumed it was going to be really different in Liverpool, and it wasn't. It didn't feel like it. And the next thing I looked at well, there's Factory Records, there's Joy Division, there's New Order, there's the Fall. I was really into the Fall, the Smiths, and so came to Manchester. And I think the thing about Manchester, particularly at that time, was if there wasn't something happening, people just said, right, we'll start doing it. If there's not a club playing the music we like, we'll start a club playing the music we like. And there's a real sort of a thing about Manchester. I don't know if it's the first industrial city, it's an entrepreneurial atmosphere or something. And I really like that. And it was really easy to sort of get up and not, it wasn't easy to do it, but it was easy to find other people who want to do stuff and be enthusiastic.
So you go to University of Manchester. How does new Fast Automatic Daffodils start?
Well, I met this lad at like the first week I was at uni, and he said, "Oh, a mate of mine plays bass, like his childhood friend from Bingley in Bradford, um, which is Justin, who was in the Fads with me." And so we sort of we were introduced, I think, at a gig, I seem to remember, and I was looking at him going, "You wanker, with you." And he had this real sort of soul boy, northern soul boy look, little beanie, uh, flick, hobnail boots, uh, turned up jeans. And I was sort of going through this sort of tweed phase, and he sort of looked at me with, he looks like a public school wanker, and I was so, which I'm not, but so we sort of reluctantly sort of like, oh, we'll get together. And then we soon like completely hit it off. And then we would just sort of go around his house. And what we'd do is we'd go on a whatever night and we'd drink loads of Thunderbird wine. If you come across Thunderbird wine, it's like
No.
really, it's like pear wine. And there's two labels. I can't remember which way around. I think it's the blue one it's like taking speed. It makes you go nutty. It's like a quid or something. We should drink neck loads of that, play really fast, and then get another bottle and walk into Manchester and go to a club because we'd save money on bus fare and stuff. Um, and so Thunderbird Wine's got a lot to answer for. That's why the Fads played so fast at the start because we were necking that stuff and playing 100 miles an hour all the time. But yeah, so with that, and then the next thing we met Pez, he's a drummer, and then he had a flat in the old Hume, where you could do anything. You could and people were doing anything like really bad things and really good things. There's loads, loads of really great artists, um, people painting, people making music, people doing like mad theatre things. Oh, there's just a really, really creative environment. At the same time, there's loads of people making drugs, taking drugs, selling drugs, holding people up, muggings and all that. So because the council couldn't charge rent, they couldn't, so you could live there for free, you see. So it did more for the arts, the Hume, the old deck access presence than any other scheme in Manchester's ever had, because everyone could live there free and people just lived there free and did stuff. So loads of stuff came out of that, and that was the kind of place where you'd break a guitar string and like four flats down, someone would have a spare string for you. And we then sort of asked around for a singer. And there's a very long, complicated story about that, but we met Andy, and we spent like, I don't know how many months sort of rehearsing, and he never sang. He used to just sit there and get stoned. And so he said, "Oh, I've got some ideas, got some ideas." Anyway, we saved up some money. We went into what was the kitchen in Hume, which is a recording studio at the time. And just knocked two flats together, and your amp was in the bath, and because it got a good sound out of that, and they had a sort of 16 track in there, and we went in there, and it later became like really that was the birthplace of acid house in Manchester was the kitchen, not the Hacienda. The kitchen was because it started throwing these parties, and it was in that tradition of the blues shebeens and stuff around Moss Side and Hume, but playing acid house music, and it was a I went once, and I was scared. I sort of went like I thought, oh, I'll go, I'll wait late, and I got there like at midnight, and there was no one there. Of course, it didn't start with 3 in the morning. I was too tired. I went home. Um, so we recorded that, and that was the first time we heard Andy sing, and
Really?
on that very first demo we did, yeah, and it was like fucking hell. He's loud, and brilliant, and the guy who was engineering it, who'd got all these bands passing through, was like, you guys are the best thing I've ever heard in the studio, and he's the best thing I've ever heard. And so it was a complete surprise to us, really. I mean, we kind of thought he'd be good because he was an actor, he was trained as an actor and stuff, but he was amazing. So that started, and then later on when we were writing big, we're in the one of the flats, and uh, we're like, it needs some congas or something on this track. And so we said, oh, that lad, Chris Crooks, lives down the corridor there. He plays. Let's go knock on Chris. And so we knocked on, and he wasn't in, but his flatmate was, who was Icarus. And Icarus said, well, I play congas. I'll come down. And so that's how Big was written. With he turned up with his congas one afternoon. It was literally an afternoon. Knocked on, helped him carry the congas around, got sat him down, played. We wrote it. Um, and that was the band sort of complete by then. But we'd released a couple of singles and done a few tours before Icarus joined by that stage.
There's a rumor that you had a dream before Andy joined the band. Is it true?
That is true. That's the long and complicated story. And I'm so old now, I can't quite remember the ins and outs of it, but pretty much it went along these lines is I dreamt about we had this singer called Andy, and I'd had to get in touch with him. And I think this other band that played guitar with a little bit had told me about him and knew about him. So I rang up to ask about this guy, Andy. And I think this is pretty much true. He wasn't there, but Andy answered the telephone, Andy Spearpoint.
Yeah.
So then I think I arranged for him to come to a party, but I dreamt, but then it turned out, anyway, I can't remember, it was a dream, but then it became a reality through this weird thing of me calling from a payphone, this other house, and speaking to the wrong Andy. It turned out to be Andy Spearpoint. It was something, it was really, but it was true. It's true that, yeah. It wasn't straightforward. We didn't put an advert in or anything. It was a dream, and I rang the wrong house, or I rang the house to speak to the wrong Andy, something like that.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Look of it, eh?
So, your musical style of the band is different to what was coming out of Manchester at the time.
Mm.
It had that Manchester feel, that baggy feel, but it had like post punk as well, like Echo and the Bunnymen,
Mm.
even the Fall as well. Um, did that come about straight away, or did you have to like? Did it come about playing with each other? Did it take a while to find your style? Is what I'm trying to say.
Well, basically, it was born out of necessity. I mean, literally, when I say we couldn't play, we couldn't play. I mean, me and Justin had this discussion, like, how do you tune a bass guitar? And we're like, I said, I think your E string is an A, but or something like that, any or a D, or anyway, he tuned it so high that the neck bent, and when we said I can't play this anymore, so we took it in to get fixed, and the guy's like, "What the hell are you doing?" And he said, "You can't tune it like that. You have to tune it like So we had to start from scratch again. We had to rewrite everything. Not we couldn't work out how to play the songs we'd written, so we just like binned them off, and then started again. And but we were I suppose what was like Pez was really into the sort of post-punk stuff. Joseph K, that sort of postcard records vibe. He was really into that, and his drumming style. There's a lot of that. Justin was into that, but he was into Northern Soul quite a bit. Had a great Northern Soul collection, and we were listening to a lot of the simplicity of that sort of that and just the groove of those things and trying to imitate that in their own way. And then I was sort of trying to play little bits and bobs over the top of it and come up with little riffs. Andy was into sort of a lot of funk music and stuff. So we weren't really listening. I don't think we were listening to what the other bands coming out of that Madchester thing did, but there was a definite synthesis of um, rhythm and guitar bands. There was that thing was similar. We were like really into the idea of rhythm and making people dance and writing something that was you moved to. And I think that was the common thing that probably we had with those other bands was they were into the same thing. They were probably coming from it more from a club orientation and try to translate it into a band where we were coming from a sort of more funk and soul almost post-punk thing and trying to transfer that into our band.
Yeah, yeah. What were the earlier gigs like?
Well, the very early one, I mean, it got we sort of got signed after 8 gigs. It happened
Really?
like yeah, we made that demo tape and we put a lot of attention to how we came across the name, which feels ridiculous now, but at the time there's loads of really short name bands like Stump and Twang and people like that. So we were like, right, we're going to do the opposite. We'll go really long. Um, Paid a lot of attention to visuals. We've got this artist to do like a woodcut thing, which we used. I think I've still got a copy of it somewhere up there. We did. Um, and this is the CD which we released last year or the year before. We re-released the original demo CD that we did, which has got the artwork on, and became quite famous. This demo tape really quickly, which is the one where we'd never heard Andy sing until he sang. Um, and then we got signed by Playtime Records. Paula Greenwood had signed the Inspiral Carpets, a couple of other bands, and we got signed to them. And so the early gigs sort of were quite riotous, really. We didn't know what we were doing, and we just sort of basically got drunk and played as fast as we could. Um, Often shaving 5 minutes off a 20-minute set, which takes some doing.
Were you
But
still
we
drinking?
stopped playing intense. Pardon?
Oh, you say were you still drinking the Thunderbird wine while you were playing live?
We backed off that later. It was like that was not good. We couldn't keep that pace up.
What would you say? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think we were, but I think there was a sort of real intensity to the band that we didn't realize. You don't realize how you're coming across unless you've done it for a long time, which we hadn't. So we weren't very conscious of how we were coming across, but I think people were really excited. Andy was turned out to be like an instant front man, he's just totally confident, um, really loud, really powerful. I mean, I think that's one of the lot of the time with new bands, the singers trying to find their voice and get the confidence up. He was just like from the get-go, it's just like it's no problem. But then he'd spent 3 years trying to be an actor, so um, I think it was sort of quite natural to him. And then they were pretty riotous, you know. I mean, it got to a certain point where it was getting, a bit of a bore having so many people diving on stage and you know, you're trying to play and amongst that. I was a rag grump. I used to get really annoyed about it and hit people with my guitar and stuff.
You mentioned Playtime Records. You released Lions and Big, and the music is shit EP
Yeah.
on that label. How do you look back at those singles and EP?
Well, I mean, you're always really when with on this sort of budget, you're really frustrated. I mean, I think that's just but I think that's kind of the condition of doing something artistic. Anything that's you're sort of instantly embarrassed by the last thing you did. And that's the compulsion to do something else and try and do something better because you don't want people to remember for the last thing you did. And I may have that to this day. I mean, the last thing I did, I hated, and I want to do something new instantly. And my advice to anyone doing anything creative is get it out there into the public sphere as quickly as you can, because otherwise you're sort of stuck in the however it could always be great, it could always be better, and you'll never get it out there, and you never really progress. So I look back on those. I mean, I look back on them fondly. I think there was sort of, I think the music is shit EP. There was some good stuff on there, and it was terribly recorded and mixed. That I really not very keen on that. Big. I mean, I wish we then because we were so upset about that, we said we'll do record and produce Big ourselves, which I don't think we did a very good job of actually. And if we'd got a bigger, better producer in, it'd probably been a bigger hit. But they are sort of they've got the charm, haven't they? That's the thing, and there's something I quite like the listening to bands and the arc of their journey from being scratchy DIY and how they cope with getting more sophisticated and bigger budgets and stuff. I quite like listening to that. So I think we're a classic example of that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, you mentioned there about the recordings and stuff. You were known as a really good live band. Was it
Mm.
hard to get that down on record?
It really difficult, really difficult. So when we got to the second album, we we chose producer Craig Leon, who'd done he'd signed the Ramones, signed Suicide, signed Blondie, produced their first records. Was a bit of a legend in the industry. But had worked with The Fall recently. We were really impressed with his work with that Bill is Dead around about that period, The Fall. And we had a studio and lived in Brussels actually, which had a really big live room because even then live rooms were starting to disappear a little bit, getting a big live room. And we record that second album is basically one, two, three, four, bang. That's the take, few overdubs, and that's it. And even then, you can't quite recreate it. I think it's not as simple. I mean, famously, Thin Lizzy, Live and Dangerous, one of the most famous live records. The only live thing on it is the bass drum, apparently. They overdubbed everything. It's in to get that sound is really 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 difficult, and we never got there. I think actually, funnily enough, I mean, we'd started writing our fourth record when it all finished and we were dropped, and I think we'd really got our heads around how, and we got enough knowledge ourselves to do it ourselves, and we would try to persuade the label that buy us the studio gear because by that time ADATs and new equipment and digital was coming through, and we'll record the next three EPs for the price of one because uh, we'd started to really understand what was going on, but we didn't get there in the end. So, but yeah, it's very very difficult. Yeah, I think any band that is, I think you've got to try and inhabit two states. You've got to have a recording studio state as a band and a live state, but trying to make that live thing work in the studio environment doesn't. Equally, it doesn't work the other way around as well. I've seen bands have made great records and they're absolutely shocking live.
Yeah.
And it's not that they can't play, they just don't have the cohesion and the projection, you know.
Well, what was it like recording the debut album Pigeonhole? Like you said, you produced the album yourself, so you're still learning at that point and stuff. What was it like?
It's great fun. I mean, we had it, there was a studio in there. It was all sort of so noddy and budget our existence. We there's a studio in High Lane, and this guy who sort of trade. I think he'd been in the Hollies or been a sound engineer for the Hollies. He had something to do with the Hollies or something. And he was sort of trading in audio studio audio equipment. And so we were recording in there with our live engineer, actually Danny Evans, who was sort of trying to whip us into shape a bit. And it was good. A lot of it was sort of written, a lot of it was sort of written in the studio. We had the songs, we played them live, but we were still arranging and as we went along. So yeah, it was one of those classic sort of, we'd stay up all night, we weren't very disciplined about it. But I mean, I think we did it all for about 12 grand, which at the time was still peanuts, and it sold, I don't know, 60, 70,000 copies. So it was it was a very profitable record, like from that perspective. But again, you look back on it and you think, well, if we'd known this, if we'd known that. But on the other hand, when you look back on things, you sort of see that as part of the development and the journey of what you're going through.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. How would the songwriting happen then? Like, would you come up with the music and Andy'd write the lyrics afterwards?
Uh, what he said. Well, Andy, if you listen to some of the words later on, some of his words are some of the best. Still, I love words and I love lyrics and I listen to them very carefully. Some of the stuff he's written is amongst the best I've ever heard. It's incredible, some of the lines he's written. But early on, it was so difficult to get him to write lyrics, and he would be like, "Oh, what's that book you're reading? Give us that book." You know, literally, we're about to do a take, Andy. And he's like, "Oh, hang on a second," and so he was really difficult to get to do it. But we generally wrote through jamming. That was more we jam a lot, and then from that would start to emerge ideas and bits of things that we'd start putting together. Sometimes, Pez and Icarus would go in and come up with a series of rhythms and play them to us, and then we'd start playing over the top. But there was no sort of sitting down, other than the odd occasion with an acoustic guitar and coming up with a song. So we kind of created these sort of montages for Andy to project his words over. And as we went along, we kind of were getting better at putting them into a sort of a more traditional sort of song format and structure. But it was all very loose, all very loose.
What's the story behind the lyrics to Fish's Eyes?
Well, that's true as well. That's the Icarus was well again. Hume, you see, was this really weird place full of you know mad people. They're like just literally people sectioned and all sorts of stuff used to go on there. So Icarus was woken at like 2 or 3 in the morning. He heard his letterbox go, so he went down and there was a dead fish with a badly typewritten note wrapped around it saying, fish's eyes will watch your lies. One of the things is to drown your fanny in a pool of dead skin, which only changed the words for that. And then literally the next day when we're going to the studio and we had this sort of groove of Fish's Eyes, and we're like, Andy, you've got to come up with some words. This is a really good example of Andy's songwriting, lyric writing approach at the time. And Icarus is like, oh, look what came through my, I was like, Jesus Christ, what came through my letterbox last night. And Andy was, oh, let's look at that. And that's literally got the studio. And Andy sort of, that was it.
Is there any other stories behind any of the other songs like that are interesting?
Well, I, working for him is, I was reading a book on Malcolm X's life. And Andy just didn't have any words. and I think I started saying, "He's like, what's that book you're reading?" And going like, and we started. I think I helped write the lyrics with that. I'm fuzzy memory, but one of the controllers had 15 runners, and that was about him when he was a gangster.
All right.
And doesn't really make any sense. Not neither does Amplifier, which is Andy just there looking around the room and singing about like plugs and shit in the room. So, but the flip side of it is that he then wrote, the desert grows 3 miles a year. It just grows. I put my pain in a jar, and he wrote, Stockholm, the opening line, lately, I find our rush, can't piece together the sun, the sky, or the spots on my face. I mean, I can't, the whole thing about being young and like the universe, but you're worried about your spots in your face, and I mean, it's incredible. So sublime and ridiculous.
You did a re-recorded version of "Get Better" with Martin Hannett, and it was one of
Yeah.
his last recordings. What was
Yeah.
he like? What was that recording like?
Well, we love Martin. We really did. I mean, he was he wasn't well when we were working with him. I had these French aspirin, which were incredibly powerful. I got from a gig in Paris or something, and he kept asking me for one every one. Give us one of them aspirin, give us two, in fact. Um, but we learnt a lot actually with Martin, and you'd think he wasn't listening. He'd be reading. He was reading magazines on yachts. I don't know why, and he suddenly go like this. He go, play the bum note there. Go back and play it. And he was always listening. And we got on really well with him. Had a great time doing that. We didn't really want to re-record that, but the label wanted another single from it and wanted that. Um, and then we were about to we were friendly enough with him that afterwards we were looking to buy a bass guitar and a bass amp, like a proper one to gig with. And Justin asked him because he knows all about. And he said, "Oh, well, meet us in the pub in the what was the Lloyd's pub in Chorlton." And we went there for a pint with him, and he'd written this essay on um, bass amplification, and at the end of it, a recommendation of the setup we should buy. And Justin still got that essay actually. He was, he was really, really clever guy, really clever, really, really smart. And it's a shame, it's an awful shame he passed away so quickly because he sort of kicked the drugs, but yeah, he wasn't a well guy. But I think there was things about that record. Funnily enough, I hadn't listened to it for years, and then someone sent me a link of a video because he was in the video, of course. Yeah,
Is that he's getting pushed around in a trolley?
yeah. So he came down he wanted to look at the Hacienda was shut at the time because of all the gang problems, and we got access to shoot. That was shot in the Hacienda, empty, and Martin wanted to come down to see the Hacienda, but he never wanted to come down when it was open because he'd fallen out with Tony and all those guys. So we told him we'd shoot the video in there, and he said, "Oh, I fancy coming down. Can I come and have a look?" I said, "Oh yeah, come on." So he came down, and when he was there, he's going, "Oh, fancy being in this video." And I said, "Yeah, that'd be great." He says, "Tell you what, lads, get us in that shopping trolley, push us around the dance floor." So we got on the stage, and he climbed. He's a big guy, and he climbed into the shopping trolley from the stage. It was a pretty precarious operation. We pushed him around, and that was it. I mean, there's a book about Martin Hannett. I picked it up, and we're in there, and it says like we forced them into this to humiliate. I think it was his idea. But it was great fun. It was really good fun. Yeah.
There's a song on that EP called Pigeonhole. Was that meant to be on the debut album or?
No, that again. I mean, we in those days you had to write a B-side or a couple of B-sides, and we always just used that. We all our B-sides were they've all got interesting bits in them, like really good bits, and we had this. We just used it as an opportunity to experiment. So we put congas through amplifiers and things like that, and just playing around with that. So, and I think we were like, "What's it going to be called?" We're like, "I don't know, called Pigeonhole." So we just it was they were all very quite throwaway, those B-sides, but great fun to do.
On stage, sometimes you'd like swapping your instruments with each other. Would you ever do that in the studio?
Yeah, we did on the first single. I think I'm playing bass on the B side and Justin's playing guitar. I think what else? I mean, Icarus played drums on a couple of things towards the last stages of the Fads. Andy played a bit of percussion. Um, I play a bit of bass. I think Andy played a bit of guitar sometimes. Um, yeah, but it wasn't a sort of it got this reputation because an accident happened on stage, or like about a second gig or something, third gig, and all within like the space of about a minute of each other. This monitor fell on Pez and reversed his hi-hats that bent the other way. Justin's bass went out of tune. Um, and then I just kept playing, and Andy grabbed the bass off Justin, tuned it up, and then started playing, and Justin was stood there. So he just picked up the mic and started shouting. And we'd previously already swapped instruments for another song. And so everyone was like, they got this review going like, man, they just don't care. They just like, in the middle of a song, they just change their instruments for no reason. But it was just out of like an accident. So there were this review went out and we got like this reputation, but actually didn't happen that much at all, really. But
We mentioned the Madchester scene earlier. You were kind of on the outskirts of that scene, but you would like play live with some of the bands. What was the relationship like with those bands?
good. I mean, we uh we did have this without sounding too big-headed, we had sort of fearsome live reputation, and a lot of bands didn't want to play with us because we just could blow people off the stage. Uh, that sounds really big-headed, but I think a lot of those bands, a lot of them have been thrust into the spotlight too quickly. They were like suddenly. I remember playing with. It was actually in Cannes in France at this industry event with Northside, and they it was just too early for them, and they by their own admission, by the way, as well. They're really nice lads, got on really well with them. Um, but they're suddenly being put under this pressure of this sort of industry showcase, and I don't know how many gigs they played that stage, like 10. So by this time we'd played like 100. So there's a real art to sort of not just being able to play in time and coherent, but calming your nerves, trusting each other, all that kind of stuff. So, but I mean, we got on really well with them, and you know, Wags, passed away recently, very sadly, and we knew him well because he lived around the corner, um, and we played with the Paris Angels a few times, and I'm trying to remember who else we played, but yeah, we go on, fine with them. I mean, I think a lot of we were very conscious though of not. We knew. I don't know how we kind of instinctively knew this. We knew that there was such a ridiculous hype about it. I mean, basically, someone walk out of a pub with a guitar and sneeze, and they got signed. Um, there's such a ridiculous amount of hype. We knew the bubble would burst inevitably, and there's always a backlash. The music press was so powerful then, make and break careers. And there was sort of this, we just felt there would probably be a sort of a reaction, especially because the press was so down south, and they could kick the scene and not be on the scene without getting their heads kicked in. you know. And I think
Yeah.
that's a thing, like if you're writing a really bad review and you're living in London, you might bump into them. You might just like you might just take it a bit easy, just because you might bump into them. So we instinctively felt that, and so we were determined to get our album out really fast. So we kind of signed very quick. We could have held out for a much bigger deal, but by that time, I think it would have been too late. And then the other thing is we try deliberately to keep the whole thing at arm's length because we just felt like if you're too closely associated with it, and then unfairly these bands like Paris Angels and Northside, you were not given the time to develop properly. And and suddenly Manchester wasn't the favourite of the month, and everything that came from Manchester was shit. There's that reaction, and it was next thing was Britpop and Seattle. So yeah, I think we got on great with them individually and personally, but we kind of didn't want to be part of it. We played with them occasionally, but didn't really want to be part of it.
You mentioned how important the press were back then, the music press. How did they treat the band? What was they like with the band?
I think we got. I don't think. Well, I mean, everyone doesn't think they get a fair shake, do they? In one way, shape, form, the other. I think the thing was that it was however they treated us. I think there was a lot of reviewers had made their minds up before they'd listened to her. They'd already go, I'm going to write this piece one way or the other. And I think it works both ways. Um, but I don't think any of it was very balanced or critically correct a lot of the time. So as a result, there were incredibly sycophantic reviews for bands was like listening and watching paint dry. Equally, there were very vicious and unfair reviews of bands that didn't deserve it. And I think it was just sort of it was quite extreme, so it didn't feel like there was a sort of middle ground. But I suppose we're in the entertainment industry. They are, a really stinking, terrible review is more entertaining to read than like, oh, they were quite good, but they could have improved here and there. Um, I mean, we've got some great reviews. I mean, the thing is, sort of outside of the UK, America and Europe, the press was fantastic for us. And it was generally kind of okay here, I mean, so we had a few sort of champions. But we because of this project where we sort of put out the live record a couple of years ago, we got out the archive. I didn't keep anything, Justin kept everything. We're going through it and reading some of the reviews is like we must have been pretty thick-skinned. Because we were always
Really?
like, yeah, yeah. We were always like, fuck them. And I suppose now we have an awareness of like, these are just young people who are perhaps we not for us, but probably now it wouldn't be acceptable to do that because you'd think someone would go, well, I'm vulnerable or I'm depressed or I have mental health problems, which might very well be true. Um, and that review or that article or whatever has sent me under. I think people would be really, really careful about that now. In a way that they weren't there, they didn't give a shit. And if you read about like Lush and you know she's got a book out, Mickey, and she was just the objectification of her, the way she's treated as a woman within a band and within the industry is just would be totally unacceptable now, or you hope it would be. And
Yeah.
a good friend of mine, Tracy, who's Bandit Queen, I didn't understand at the time, but the utter frustration she had at the way they didn't get a fair shake. We couldn't ever complain from what they had, for example. They didn't get a fair shake whatsoever. And it was like, girls playing guitars, well, it was all that absolute fucking sexist bullshit. And so I don't think I can complain, I think people had a lot worse.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you touched on the second album. You went over to Brussels to record that. What was that experience like?
Well, again, I mean, I just love recording. I mean, I think the third album we didn't enjoy particularly, but the second album we really enjoyed. It was really creative environment. Craig took us over there. I think, we were 3 weeks, maybe a month in rehearsal, doing arrangements, so just learning to play the songs as we were going to go into the studio. So when we went in, we knew exactly what we we're doing. Um, it was great to be outside of the UK. I mean, Brussels is a good place to work because it's quite boring. So you just got to get your head down. Um, it was really, really creative experience. That's the most creative experience I had as a musician in the fads, and I think probably for everyone else. Um, and it was great working with him. He was a really entertaining guy. And he had his wife would be a singer in the 13th floor elevators. They were full of incredible rock and roll stories, of suicide and Blondie and all this kind of stuff. And so it was really good. It was really, really good experience. I think mixing it, we mixed it in London in Britannia Row, and actually, I think Craig was a great producer. Maybe, the mix. There's a radio edit done by Mike Spike Stent who did Stockholm, and that's absolutely his mix is brilliant. And I wish he'd mixed the whole album, but in terms of it's two different disciplines, and in terms of producing and getting a brilliant performance out of you, Craig was fantastic at that. And he
Yeah.
was wild. He's a bit like funny little guy, but he'd be like, Dolan, make that crazier, crazier, make it, like, and he sort of really let you off the leash and stuff. And I nearly worked with him again because I can't remember the band. In fact, well, I do remember the band, but I'm not going to say who they were because he was working with this band. He was saying, listen, the guitar playing was like, he said it was just so tame. And said, he turned around and said, unless you get your act together and really let rip and bringing in Dolan from the New Fads, who's gonna, and they obviously jumped into action and responded to his instruction. But that would be a good example of how we would wind someone up. You'd say that, and you'd get a good performance out of them, and yeah, it's good fun, really good.
Yeah, good. But you mentioned there the third album wasn't as enjoyable. Could you see
No.
it to an end at that point?
Yeah, I think yeah, everyone thinks everything's forever. That's you don't ever set out to do something like a band which takes so much energy and effort to think that it's going to stop and end. But I think the writing was on the wall for us for a number of reasons. Personal circumstances amongst us had changed. There was pressure to write a commercial record, and there's a real tension between us trying to sort of fulfill a commercial obligation and a artistic, creative obligation. I think we didn't have the right producer for us at the time. It doesn't make any one of these people bad at what they do. It's just the combinations of things. There's a guy called Jeremy Allen who'd mixed most of Blue Lines. He was the mix engineer for most of Blue Lines. So we thought, from a rhythmic perspective and stuff, and actually sonically, all the sounds are individually are brilliant if you listen to that record in terms of how it all hangs together. And I think that was symptomatic of perhaps as a band we weren't as close as well at that point, and we probably all of us had started to have one eye on the next thing we were going to do in what varying combination or non-combination. So yeah, it was just all a bit sterile, really. And interestingly, whereas Craig had been like, yeah, wilder, more get it out there. We even to the point when it was mixed, it was so clean. I went back down and redid virtually all the guitars for that album through an SSL desk because we've done it on a Neve desk. It was so smooth to give it that crunch and punch and a bit of life into it. So I spent like about 2 weeks in London redoing every guitar track virtually on that. Yeah, so it wasn't a particularly enjoyable. It was a real labor. I think the thing is, in a funny sort of way, we kind of went through that and then we got over it, and we'd like gone right. Actually, what we need to do is synthesize album number Pigeonhole and album number two. If we did get a synthesis of that and everything we'd learned and understood from recording with an 8 track and so on, and the songs we were writing were really interesting sort of hybrids of that. So I think in a funny sort of way, we'd got over that. We're like, right, we're on to the next thing. We've figured it out. But the label, said goodbye, and we didn't really have the energy or the desire to sort of slog it out for another deal at that point.
How come? Just could tell it come to a natural end kind of thing.
Yeah, I think there's a really good maxim about, it's never too soon, And I think it was, it was the right thing to do. Look, it didn't feel like it at the time, but it was the right thing to do. And I think for us, we were all ready to do something, different and maybe have a bit of time. We didn't like all bands, is live in each other. We toured a lot and we live in each other's pockets for, several years. So I think we were sort of ready to have a bit of a break. Um, but yeah, I think it's one of the things that I hate looking back. I don't like nostalgia particularly. I don't think times were better, uh, and times are worse now. I'm not one. I don't have that mentality. I don't have any real desire to ever reform or play a gig again as the new fads. I feel that it was a moment that we had, and we were that last. I don't know if you've heard it, but the last live recording of us at the Hacienda, that was us like, fuck me, could we play? I mean, really good, really, really great band, really tight. And it's amazing. We'll never be able to play with that energy, technical skill, zest, etc. ever again, and we'd be fooling anyone otherwise. And I kind of feel like that is a really nice, you know, bookend to it all.
What was that last gig like then at the Hacienda?
It was small. We did it as we deliberately set it up as a recording. It was really a recording with an audience. That's what it was. And we, um, through the sheer hard work of our sound engineer and Tom Piper, both of whom worked with Elbow ever since for the past 20 years, that we begged, borrowed, and stole, recording equipment, got 16 track down there, and I don't know if you heard the story. We've all told this on the Guy Garvey show or whatever, but basically we recorded it, started working on the Thin Lizzy approach, replacing bits and repairing and patching up. Kind of lost enthusiasm, and about 5, 6 years later, we returned to it and said, right, look, we've got to crack on. And we were making, real progress in terms of finishing. And then the studio got burgled, and so the hard drive went, and that was it. So fast forward to 2019, and so this is like 20 years later. Uh, we so we've all remained really good friends. So we see each other all the time, go to the pub together, and you know, and that's the great gift that this has given us is friendship. That's the thing I take up from it. So my Pez, me, Justin, Mike Farnello's our tour manager, and our respective wives, girlfriends, and children go on holiday together. And so we'd gone to this. We'd all been in Europe to having a holiday. We hired this big place and all met up there. And then 18 bottles of Cote de Rhone. We've moved up in the world. We're from the Thunderbird to the Cote de Rhone now. We're like, we've got to get those. I tell you what we'll do. We'll put those out as they are, where we got them up to, and we'll sell them, and that'll pay for our next holiday, right? So of course, then COVID struck, and then everything got on the back burner. But eventually, we got our act together. Right, going to put it out, and we'll do the first demo that I showed you before. The very first thing we ever did, and the very last thing we ever did. Put those out. So I texted the sound engineer, Danny Evans. Said, Danny, look, I know you put loads of work into this. I mean, like a lot of work. Just to let you know, we're putting it out as it is, and thanks very much. But I just want to give you the heads up. 2 days later, I get a text off me going, I found it. And I'm like, what? So I ring him up, It turns out because I texted him, obviously it's now in his head. And he goes on the hard drive library, which is on the computer, like all the logging of the hard drives on for Elbow. And he's looking for something Elbow, and he sees this thing that says Fad One, and he clicks on it. And goes, he says that's the new Fad's mixes. So he goes in this cupboard, roots around, finds this really old hard drive, and it won't work on the computer system. Tom, the other guy, who's the tour manager for us and tour manager for Elbow, he never throws anything away. And he's got a pigsty down in Shropshire, which he keeps everything in. He drives down to Shropshire, pulls out a really old Apple Mac, brings it up. Somehow I think he gets the Apple Mac going off a car battery because the internal battery's completely fucked in it because he's like an engineer, Tom. Fire it up, they read the hard drive, drag all the files off it, put it in a modern computer. And then Danny just got rid of all the overdubs and everything. And literally that's us playing. No overdubs, nothing. That's it. And it sounded amazing. And one, Danny's sort of 20 years more experience as an engineer. Two, technology's come on massively. And that's how that came about. So those mixes, actually, Danny redid them, but he basically said he just got it and just balanced it, and then that was it. And it sounds, in my opinion, it sounds much better than all our fanning around with it. So yeah, we were really lucky with that. That came out. That was brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. You
And we made
mentioned.
money off Bandcamp, and we're going away for. I won't mention how old we are, but we're going away. We've hired a big place in Anglesey for us all to have a big party for. It's lots of people's big birthday this year, so we've hired that, and the Fads Hacienda release paid for it.
It's good that you're all still good mates as well, because it could have ended sour, couldn't it? But
Yeah, we're really good. I mean, Andy's lives in Ireland, so you don't see enough of him. He was across and staying with me a few weeks ago. Um, but we're always texting and he's telling us about his music and stuff, and then he comes on holiday when he can. Icarus is he's just always around somewhere around the world touring with a lot of time with Massive Attack. He's done a lot of work with Massive Attack, but he's doing like visual arts,
oh,
visual
yeah.
visuals, and so I mean, he's as an artist in his own right, as a visual artist, he's exhibited at the Tate, subsequently and stuff. So we don't see a great deal of him because he's always like, "Sorry, I'm in Mexico, flying across Chile at the moment, in Sudan or whatever." He's always somewhere exotic. So
You mentioned you don't like looking back and like it won't be the same these days. But were you ever close to a reunion?
we did at one point about probably about I would say 15 years ago. Yeah. Maybe 15, no, maybe a bit more. Maybe shit. Yeah, 15, 20 years ago. Um, we got an offer and it was really a lot of money. It seemed a lot anyway. And so we started talking around this, and the idea being, we're like, well, look, it's not the kind of music, not because it's particularly sophisticated, it just requires a lot of discipline to play it and to stop and start and all the arrangements and stuff. So you can't just get an acoustic guitar and sort of bang it out. It's not like that. Um, so it take quite a lot of rehearsal. So we were like, okay, well, if we're going to do it, let's do 10 shows or whatever. We'll do a few festivals, do some shows in Europe and stuff. Because we've put all the work in. It seems daft just to do one if we're going to do it. So we all start getting quite giddy about that. And then Justin and I, being the people that we are, we're like, why are we playing this promoter? Why are we, hang on a second, why don't we do this ourselves, right? Why don't we just promote ourselves? Because I mean, Justin's run the electric chair and all the electric stuff for years, so he knows all about promotion. Um, so anyway, and then we just sort of like again, we're just classically too ambitious and bit off more than we could chew, and it didn't happen. But I think from that there was also, I think if we'd really wanted to do it, we would have done it. We're quite determined people, so it was still not. We weren't like really passionate about doing it. It was we thought, oh, like we could make a couple hundred grand here if we were smart. It was more like that than a real strong desire. So I think you're either none of us are forced economically to have to do that. So I think that's a big drive for people. If you need the cash, why the hell not do it? You should do. You put all that effort into establishing a brand and an IP and all that. But we don't need that, and we're fortunate. And musically, as I say, I think it wouldn't be the same. So always a bit like it's better to remember it being brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Like I say, some bands do come back and it is good, but some bands they can tarnish it sometimes, can't they? What
You
they
can
have.
do. I think there's some people that come back and done it really well. And I mean, I'd be interested to see like someone like Northside, who I see is doing a lot. I bet they're better now,
Yeah.
because of they've had the years but to be able to create that sort of excitement. I mean, the audience are more tired than you are.
what what were you doing after the band split then? Because you released your debut solo album 2 years ago. So what were you doing within that time?
So a lot of things. I mean, initially what I did was Danny, who was a sound engineer, and Icarus and I started a music project, which lasted about. We came very close to getting a very big record deal, and it's one of the, it's yeah. Without sounding too mysterious, there's things I can't go into with that. Not between us, but like it was it was a bit difficult and it fell through. And actually, I became quite disillusioned with the whole thing about the music industry. And my sister she lives in Tanzania now, but at the time she was living in Botswana. And I went out to see her. She's like in the middle of on the edge of the Kalahari Desert. And I had this sort of like realize this epiphany when I heard I was in this. It sounds really, but it was. This is true. I was at the Okavanga Delta, one of the last wildernesses left on the planet, and we're camping near this river. And I got up. You get up like 5 o'clock in the morning there, and there was a one of the guides had a little thumb piano. We was just sat by the riverbank, playing the thumb piano and singing, and it was so beautiful. And another a week later, this local family said, "Oh, do you want to come round to our house for something to eat?" So we went round there, and their daughters got up and sang us this welcome, like beautiful, beautiful harmonies, this welcome song. And I was like, in this idea of like the ego and rock stars and our industry and the way we view music, and other cultures have it so that everyone, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, make music. It's very democratic. It's part of their life and daily life and ritual. So I just sort of thought, I'm just going to stop. I literally came back to Manchester, stopped, and during that process, and then I've married and had children and run businesses and ran a big advertising agency. I was one of the owners until recently. I was lucky enough to be able to sell some shares and take a step back. But during that time, became a fan of music again. We all start off as fans. That's why you do it. We love it. And I just started, I'd got to the point where I couldn't listen to anything without thinking, if it was really good in a band that I knew, I'd be like, you bastards. Jealousy, or, overly critical, or how did they get that snare drum sound? Or that guitar playing's quite good, but so all the time you're listening with this critical ear, and then once that voice inside your head shuts down, you go back to just loving it. And I've just really fell in love with music um, again during that period of time. So it was like 20. I mean, the last thing I ever I released some stuff with some other people, probably, let's say 1998. And then 22 years later, uh, and I kept playing the guitar and stuff a bit, but not much. It's hard to do that when you've got three kids and they're all little and rubbing marmalade all over your fretboard and stuff. But yeah, so I just became a real fan again, and I'm really grateful of that. Actually, I'm really grateful of discovering my real love and enjoyment of music again. And then early 2020, just before lockdown, where I worked, we bought a load of stuff for this photo shoot, and in it was we'd had to give some stuff back. We'd never used it, and it was a credit note, and we couldn't. No one wanted it. It was a music shop. So someone, finance guy said, "No, you need to have this, go to this music shop." So I went along and I thought, I've never had a loop pedal. I'm going to buy a loop pedal. So I bought a loop pedal. And at the same time, my daughter was learning the piano. We got a half decent piano. And th those two things sort of set it off. And then lockdown happened, of course. So there's sort of three things happened. And then suddenly I was sort of back into it. But I just remember writing, and I still look. I love if I hear the opening of it, and I know it's my own music, but in Waterboatman, and I remember writing that's on a loop. It's all on a loop that recording, and I'd written the loop and the lead bit, and I sent it to Andy because lockdown happened. Oh, fancy doing something, and he came back with these beautiful words, fantastic words, and then my sister is the backing vocalist on, and she also does a lead vocal track on there. Who's a really great folk singer. So I sent it to her, said, you do some backing vocals on this? And she did these backing vocals, and suddenly it was like, oh. And then the next day I wrote another one. And so I wrote that album, I wrote about 80% of it in the space of like 3 months or something. It was just like every time I picked guitar up, I had another idea. The last 20% took like another 18 months to write. But yeah, so I just sort of fell into it. And then, I just have had a bit more time. I started working part-time, got more and more into making music. I really enjoyed releasing that. No pressure. It's just an expression of like a moment in time for me. The writing behind it. Even ventured into singing, which is most unlike me. So
What was
yeah,
it
I'm
like,
really proud of that. Adam,
what was it like going into singing? Were you nervous at first about that?
doing what, sorry?
Like when you started singing and putting your voice on a record, were you nervous about
Oh,
that to start with?
everyone hates the sound of their own voice, and if you really hate the sound of your own voice. Um, I'd drink a bit too much whiskey and then hide down in the shed at the end of the garden here and sort of like this. But I think it's one of those things I felt like I'd written words that I wanted me to sing them. So on that record, I've got like Tracy, my friend Tracy, I mentioned before. I wrote all of that, but she sang that and made it amazing. My sister did all the backing vocals and then she wrote a song on there. And my friend Andy sang Waterboatman, and then another person I'd worked with in the past, Johnny Woodhams, wrote and sang a couple of tracks. So it was good doing that actually. I enjoyed working with the other artists. I've got another album which is written. It's just about finished, just about mixed and everything. Another Road Turn album, and that is 90% me singing. Um, Apart from my daughter, who is a really great singer and songwriter who's only 15, 16. And I was doing something and she walked in and picked the mic up and said, I can sing to that. And when it sang, I was like, yes, you can. We've kept that one. But yeah, so it's been really again really enjoyable to go back into that. But I've tried to really keep the fan in me going throughout of this and not, but having said that, I'm doing so much music now because I then released something under another name with Concrete Society about a month ago, which is a sort of back to the future to look to the future kind of imaginary band called the Concrete Society, which is a sign on the Mancunian Way. It says the Concrete Society Award 1968. They used to cycle under it for 10 years. They also sort of make a good band name. So I came up with this idea of this sort of kind of 80s band, you know, formed under the underpass of the Mancunian Way. So I've released that, but I've kept that on Bandcamp.
All right.
And CDs and stuff. That's gone really well. I haven't got a copy here, but and then I'm in the middle of I'm doing a lot of work with a sound artist um, who is appeared on a Fads record. He's actually a sort of relation by a second marriage to me, Uncle Pete, Pete Appleton. And so he was on Hexagon Spring, one of the a B-side that we did, which is still, I think, probably the best thing we ever did. And he's got an album coming out, so I've been co-writing with him. And then Justin, who hasn't done anything for 15 years, we were going on these walks and we started talking about a concept of a project we would do. And we were sort of making up rules and ideas around what we would do and what we wouldn't do, what it would sound like and what it wouldn't sound like. And then again, maybe there is a sort of massive role of serendipity in my life, like the thing about the dream and Andy and all of that. We were trying to finish off the very last bit of cataloging we're doing with the new Fads. We're just mastering some demos that we never released. And I said, oh, all that stuff we've been talking about, I just had a bash at knocking some ideas together. So I got them up and then we didn't discuss it. And we literally, the last note we ever played together was on that stage at the Hacienda. That was the last thing we ever did. And anyway, we spent the next 6 hours writing this track. And I went back and I had to log on to an account to do the Fads because we've been looking at stuff. And the password was the date. Part of the password, I can't give away the rest of the password. Part of the password was the date of the last where we played that gig. And it was 29 years to the day, literally 29 years to the day. We last played a note together and we started playing music together. And now I'm surrounded by all these mad keyboards he's brought around. We're quite deep into writing this now. We've been doing this all day, every Friday for the past sort of 6 weeks. And so that'll be coming out as well. That's a sort of kind of krautrock inspired um, project that we've been working on as well. So it's like the music's come back in a massive way in my life, in a way that I didn't expect, and it's a really lovely thing, really fantastic thing later in life for it just to come flooding back in such a big way.
Yeah, it's great that you're still doing all this. Like you say, it's come back to you doing all these different projects and stuff. It's good that you keep yourself busy and that with it. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
but send me some links of the stuff you've done, and
I
I'll
will
leave
do.
it in the description
Yeah, yeah.
for people to check out if they want to check out your solo stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I'll send you the links. I'll send you the links to the live Fad stuff as well, which is Bandcamp only.
Yeah, anything you like, yeah, let me know and I'll put it in the description. Yeah.
Great, yeah.
Well, thank you for that. It's been great to hear your story from the start to the current day. It's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
It was a pleasure to talk to you as well. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Thank you for joining me. It's been great to speak to you. I'll see you in a bit.
Bye now.
Bye. Thank you.